It was a warm, sunny Saturday afternoon, September 27th, 1969. Bryan Hartnell, a 20-year-old student, and his girlfriend, Cecilia Shepard, 22, were at Lake Berryessa. They were enjoying a quiet picnic. The sun was out, the water was calm. It was a peaceful day. They found a small cove on an island just off the shore. They anchored their boat there. They laid out a blanket. They were just talking, relaxing. It was a perfect escape from everything. But that peace was about to shatter. It shattered in a way no one could imagine. It became one of the most chilling crime scenes in American history. It put Bryan Hartnell in a unique, terrible place. He became the only male survivor of the Zodiac Killer. He saw the killer. He lived to tell about it. But the story of what happened next and how much he was questioned is complex. It's not as simple as it seems. A man approached them. He wore a strange costume. It was a dark, hood-like garment. It had eye holes cut out. It had a white cross circle symbol on the chest. He held a gun. It looked like a .45 automatic. He was deliberate. He was not rushed. He tied Bryan and Cecilia with pre-cut clothesline. He tied them up, back to back. He said he was going to rob them. He said he was going to take their money in their car. But that was a lie. It was a cruel, terrifying lie. The man started stabbing them. He stabbed Bryan 6 times in the back. He stabbed Cecilia 10 times. It was brutal. It was senseless. It was pure evil. Bryan could feel the knife going in. He could feel the pain. He could hear Cecilia. He could hear her breathing. He could feel her go limp. He thought he was going to die. He thought they both were going to die right there. The killer walked away. He left them for dead. He walked over to Bryan's car. He took a black felt tip pen. He wrote a message on the car door. It read, Vallejo 12 to 2068 7 to 469, Sept 27 to 69 630 BY knife, and then beneath it the Zodiac symbol. He was claiming his work. He was leaving a signature. He was taunting everyone. Bryan was still alive, barely. He was bleeding heavily. He was in immense pain. Cecilia was also still alive, but she was much worse. She was bleeding too. Bryan managed to untangle himself. He untied himself from Cecilia. He tried to get help. He tried to call out. He crawled. He struggled. He somehow made it to his car. He saw the message he knew. This wasn't just a random attack. This was the Zodiac. 2 college students, 2 fishermen found them. They saw Bryan stumbling. They saw Cecilia lying there. They rushed for help. They called the police. The police and paramedics arrived quickly. Bryan and Cecilia were both rushed to the hospital. They were fighting for their lives. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. She never regained consciousness. She succumbed to her injuries, but Bryan Hartnell incredibly survived. He was badly wounded. His lungs were collapsed. He had massive blood loss. He was in critical condition, but he lived. He became the Zodiac Killer's only male survivor. He was the most important living witness. He saw the killer. He spoke to him. He was there. So why was this man, this critical witness, barely questioned? That's a question that comes up a lot. It makes sense to ask it. You'd think the police would be all over him. They would want every single detail. They would want to know everything he saw, everything he heard. They would want it immediately. And they did want that. But the reality of the situation was far more complicated than just wanting answers. Bryan Hartnell was dying. He was bleeding out. His body was shutting down. When the police and paramedics arrived, their first job was to save his life. It wasn't to take a detailed statement. It was to get him to a hospital. It was to stop the bleeding. It was to make sure he had a chance to live. That's the top priority in any emergency. A witness is only useful if they are alive. Once he was in the hospital, things didn't get easier for questioning. Bryan was in immense pain. He was hooked up to machines. He was getting blood transfusions. He was recovering from major surgery. He was sedated. He was in shock. His body was trying to heal from 6 stab wounds. His lungs were fighting to work again. His mind was reeling from the trauma. Imagine being in that state. Imagine seeing what he saw. Imagine feeling what he felt. Then imagine trying to recall every single detail perfectly. Imagine doing that while doctors are working on you, while nurses are checking vitals, while your body is screaming in agony. It's nearly impossible. It's not like the movies. You don't just sit up and give a perfect description. The police did question Bryan. They absolutely did. But they had to be careful. They had to be gentle. They couldn't push him too hard. They couldn't put his life at risk. They couldn't cause him more trauma. They questioned him in short bursts. They asked direct questions. They focused on what he could give them. What did he give them? He gave them a lot, actually. Despite his condition, he provided key details. He described the killer's costume. He described the cross-circle symbol. He described the gun. He described the car. He described the strange, calm demeanor of the killer. He described the conversation they had, the killer's false pretense of being an escaped convict and needing money to go to Mexico. He described being tied up. He described the stabbing. This information was crucial. It confirmed what the police were already suspecting based on the note on the car door. This was the Zodiac. The details Bryan provided helped link this attack to the previous Zodiac crimes. It confirmed the killer's method, his signature, his audacity, but the police couldn't get more than he could give. And what he could give was limited by several factors. First, the killer was in disguise. The hood, the sunglasses which Bryan mentioned, the costume. It was designed to obscure identification. Bryan saw the man's build, his general height, his voice, but he didn't see his face. He couldn't describe facial features. He couldn't give a detailed composite sketch of a face that wasn't visible. This wasn't Bryan's fault. It was the killer's careful planning. Second, the trauma itself. Being stabbed multiple times is not just physically devastating, it's mentally shattering. Her memory under extreme stress can be patchy. It can be incomplete. The brain focuses on survival, not on recording every minute detail for later recall. The brain might fill in blanks, it might distort things, it's a natural protective mechanism. Third, the medical situation, the pain medication, the sedatives, the shock. All of these things affect clarity of thought and memory recall. The police couldn't just stop his medication to get a clearer statement. That would be unethical. It would be dangerous. So, when people say he was barely questioned, it's not because the police didn't care. It's not because they dropped the ball, it's because they were dealing with a critically injured, traumatized young man. They were working within the constraints of medical necessity and human capacity. They got what they could, when they could. They interviewed him at the hospital. They took down his statements, they got the essential details. They used that information to issue alerts to look for a specific car to try and find a man matching the description. They did everything they could with the information he could provide. And remember, Bryan Hartnell was interviewed by different officers. He spoke to law enforcement multiple times over his recovery period. It wasn't just one quick chat. As he healed, as his mind became clearer, as he processed the event, he would have been able to provide more details or clarify previous ones. But the initial questioning, the most critical fresh information, had to happen under those very difficult circumstances. It's also important to consider the nature of police investigations. They don't rely on just one source. Bryan's account was invaluable, yes, but they also had other pieces of the puzzle. They had the note on the car door, they had the crime scene itself, they had other witnesses like the two women who saw a suspicious car leaving the area. They used all of this information together. Bryan's story was a huge part of it, but it wasn't the only part. Think about Bryan's life after this. He survived, but his life was changed forever. The physical wounds healed, mostly. The mental and emotional wounds, those are a different story. Living through that, seeing your girlfriend die, knowing you were face to face with a serial killer, that leaves a mark. A deep, lasting mark. Bryan Hartnell went on to live a remarkably quiet life. He finished college, he went to law school, he became a lawyer, he married. He had children. He chose to live as normal a life as possible. He rarely spoke about the Zodiac attack publicly. This was his way of coping. This was his way of moving forward. He didn't want to be defined by that terrible day. He wanted to reclaim his life. His choice to remain private also contributes to the perception that perhaps he wasn't maximized as a witness. But that was his right. He was a victim. He had endured unspeakable horror. He had given his statement to the police, he had done what he could. After that, he was allowed to heal in his own way. He was allowed to live his life. If he had constantly been in the media, constantly reliving it, constantly being asked about it, it would have been an endless nightmare. It would have hindered his recovery. The police and society respected his need for privacy. This isn't a sign that they didn't question him enough. It's a sign of understanding the human cost of such a crime. The Zodiac case remained unsolved. That is the frustrating truth. And when a case goes cold, people look for reasons why. They look for things that could have been done differently. If only they had questioned Bryan more. The reality is that the Zodiac Killer was incredibly cunning. He wore disguises. He chose remote locations. He planned his attacks carefully. He left cryptic messages. He was good at not being caught. Even with a living witness like Bryan Hartnell, identifying him was incredibly difficult. Bryan could describe the voice. He described it as calm, even-toned. He described the killer's size and build. He thought he was about 5 feet 8 inches to 6 feet 0 inches heavy build. He described the eyes through the holes in the hood. He said they were brown. These details were important. They narrowed down the possibilities. But they weren't enough to pinpoint a single person. They weren't enough to make an arrest. The barely questioned idea often stems from a lack of publicly available details about the depth of police interviews. Investigations are often kept private. The full transcripts of witness statements aren't usually released to the public. So, we don't know every single question asked, every single answer given. We only know what was eventually made public or what Bryan himself chose to share later. It's very likely that as Bryan recovered, detectives did follow up. They would have come back to the hospital. They would have gone to his home after he was discharged. They would have walked him through his account again. So they would have tried to jog his memory for any small detail he might have missed or forgotten in the initial chaos. This is standard procedure, but again, these follow-ups would also be done with care, respecting his recovery process. The Zodiac Killer's taunts continued after the Lake Berryessa attack. He sent letters to newspapers. He continued his reign of terror. Bryan Hartnell's testimony became one of the foundational pieces of evidence in the entire case. It was vital. It helped establish the pattern and helped confirm the identity of the killer as the Zodiac. The image of Bryan Hartnell, severely wounded but alive, being transported from the crime scene is powerful. It represents defiance. It represents survival. It represents the human spirit fighting against absolute evil. For him to then be able to speak, to give an account, under those conditions is remarkable. To say he was barely questioned is to undervalue what he went through. It's to misunderstand the constraints of emergency medicine and trauma. It implies negligence where there was likely care and pragmatic necessity. The police could not and should not have subjected him to an intense, lengthy interrogation while his life hung in the balance. His descriptions, though limited by the killer's disguise, were still the best eyewitness account available. No other victim had survived to give such a detailed report of a face-to-face encounter. Darlene Ferrin and Paul Stine's killers were seen by others, but not by their victims who then survived. Bryan was unique. He was the key. And his descriptions helped. They provided a general physical profile. They gave police an idea of the killer's mannerisms, his voice, his MO. This wasn't nothing. Yeah, it was a lot. But it wasn't enough to crack the case open. That speaks more to the killer's elusive nature than to any failing in Bryan's testimony or the police's questioning of him. Bryan Hartnell's story is one of incredible resilience. He chose to survive, and he chose to live. He did his part for the investigation, he shared what he could, and then he spent the rest of his life quietly trying to heal. He didn't seek fame. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to be Bryan Hartnell, not the Zodiac survivor. The fact that the Zodiac case remains unsolved is a testament to the killer's evasiveness, not a reflection on Bryan Hartnell or the immediate police response to his critical situation. It's a tragedy that the killer was never caught. It's a tragedy that Cecilia Shepard lost her life. And it's a testament to Bryan's strength that he overcame such a horrific event and rebuilt his life, giving what he could to help catch a monster, all while battling his own wounds seen and unseen. The questions about his questioning stem from a natural human desire for answers in a case that has none, but they often overlook the brutal reality of what Bryan endured. He was questioned, he was listened to, but he was also critically injured and needed to live first. And that was the right priority.